If you watch the evening news, the Khalistan movement usually looks like a textbook religious insurgency.
Right.
You
Yeah.
see the imagery, the rhetoric, the fierce theological divisions, and it just seems obvious. This is a conflict born out of radical theology.
Absolutely. It looks that way on the surface.
But what if the seeds of this devastating geopolitical crisis weren't actually planted by militant ideology at all? What if, what if they were planted by an agricultural miracle that actually saved India from massive famine?
Yeah, it really forces a complete reevaluation of history because when you move that analytical lens away from the religious surface and focus on the underlying economic architecture, well, the entire timeline of the conflict changes shape.
It really does. And welcome to another deep dive. Today we are unpacking an incredibly complex, historically dense, and frankly, heavily fraught issue.
We're looking at the Khalistan movement in India, utilizing a remarkably comprehensive documentary by the YouTube channel Cogito titled Why India Fears a Sikh State.
Right. And before we get into the weeds, I want to make our mission for you, the listener, unequivocally clear. We are dealing with highly politically charged history here.
Very much so.
It involves deep, generational trauma on multiple sides, and we are not here to take sides, and we are certainly not endorsing any specific political viewpoints.
Exactly. Our job on this deep dive is just to impartially unpack the facts, the timelines, and the perspectives presented in that documentary.
Right, to help you understand the anatomy of a geopolitical crisis.
Yeah, we are really focusing on causality here, examining how specific government economic decisions and resource allocations inadvertently became the engines of political radicalization.
Okay, let's unpack this. The central premise we pulled from the source material is that the Khalistan movement was heavily fueled by the unintended consequences of the Green Revolution.
Right.
So to understand the tragic violence of the 1980s, we basically have to look back at the 1960s and 70s in the Indian state of Punjab.
Right, because India was facing severe cascading food shortages during that era. I mean, to avert a catastrophic famine, the government initiated what we call the Green Revolution.
Which was a massive deed.
Huge. They introduced Norman Borlaug's high-yielding variety, or HYV, wheat and rice cultivars. And Punjab, despite being India's fourth smallest state, it was transformed into the epicenter of this agricultural overhaul.
And the productivity metrics they hit are just incredible. I
Yeah.
mean, Punjab was suddenly producing 70% of India's wheat and 55% of its rice.
Yeah, they essentially became the nation's breadbasket overnight.
Right. But the biological mechanics of those HYV seeds set up this massive economic trap.
Yeah, because those cultivars are engineered with shorter, stronger stalks. So the plant puts all its energy into growing the grain rather than the stem.
Which sounds great, right?
It does, but to achieve that yield, the plants require an entire ecosystem of synthetic inputs. You cannot just plant them and rely on the monsoon.
Right, they need a lot of help.
A lot. They require immense, consistent irrigation so the crops don't burn up. And furthermore, they rapidly deplete the soil of natural nutrients.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that requires massive, continuous applications of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides.
It's essentially a geopolitical version of a company town.
Yeah.
Like, the state hands you a highly productive farm, but you are now forced to buy all your essential inputs from the company store.
The proprietary seeds, the chemicals, the diesel for the water pumps.
Exactly. And mostly on credit, too. It's like being gifted a high-performance sports car, but you have to pay for the prohibitively expensive high-octane fuel and maintenance just to keep your job.
That is a great analogy. And that structural overhead altered the entire fabric of Punjabi society. Because the vast profits of the Green Revolution, well, they consolidated almost exclusively at the top.
Right.
They went to the wealthy, land-owning farmers, predominantly from the Jat caste, who already had the capital to invest in tube wells and tractors.
Meanwhile, the small-scale, poorer farmers were actively pushed by state policy to modernize. But because traditional banks wouldn't lend to small farmers without substantial collateral, they were forced into the hands of informal moneylenders.
Who were charging predatory interest rates, sometimes upwards of 30 or 40%.
Which is just wild. They were taking out these high-interest loans just to buy the fertilizer needed for the next harvest. So when a crop failed or prices fluctuated, they just couldn't service the debt.
No, they couldn't. They were forced to sell their ancestral lands to the wealthy landowners, literally just to survive.
And the statistics from the documentary map this consolidation perfectly. It's staggering. By 1980, just 10% of rural households controlled 75% of Punjab's agricultural wealth.
Right, so you have this agrarian society where an entire class of independent farmers is systematically stripped of their land and pushed into destitution.
And compounding this debt crisis is the physical reality of the water supply. I mean, Punjab literally translates to the land of five rivers.
Right, water is in the name.
Exactly. Yet the central government maintained strict control over river water allocation. In 1976, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi issued an executive order giving Punjab only 24% of the water from its own rivers.
And diverting the remaining 76% to neighboring states.
That is a massive flashpoint.
It is, because when you divert that surface water, the farmers are forced to pump groundwater to keep those thirsty HYV crops alive, and so the water table plummets.
Which creates a vicious cycle.
Exactly. To reach the dropping water table, small farmers have to dig deeper, more expensive bore wells. That requires stronger pumps, burning more diesel fuel, which drives them further into the hands of the moneylenders.
Now, normally in a developing economy, a displaced agricultural workforce transitions into the industrial sector, right? The farmers lose their land, so they move to the cities and get manufacturing jobs.
Building electronics or machinery or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But that safety valve just didn't exist in Punjab. Between 1980 and 1985, only 0.04% of India's total budget for industry was invested in the state.
0.04.
It's basically nothing. Why wouldn't they invest in industry there?
Well, the central government deliberately kept Punjab an agrarian state to secure the national food supply. They actively neglected industrializing the region.
So you end up with a terrifyingly volatile cocktail. You have an ancient, historically self-sufficient society facing crushing agricultural debt, diverted river water, and virtually zero industrial jobs.
Yeah, thousands of young Sikhs had to immigrate to the UK and Canada just to find work.
And the resentment toward the central government in New Delhi was absolute. The state basically hollowed out the economy, which created a massive power vacuum.
And in the late 1970s, Jarnail Singh Pindrinwal stepped directly into that vacuum.
Right, the charismatic Sikh preacher.
Yeah, he recognized the deep agrarian anger caused by the Green Revolution and frankly, he weaponized it.
He directed all of that economic fury at New Delhi, right? Specifically targeting what he called the Hindu imperialist rulers.
Exactly. He argued the state was intentionally siphoning away Punjab's wealth and trying to erase Sikh culture.
And he didn't just preach, he took action on the ground. He launched a massive, highly successful campaign against alcoholism in the villages.
Which makes total sense from an economic standpoint.
Right, when you have heavily indebted, unemployed men losing their family farms, alcoholism devastates those communities.
Yeah, he offered this puritanical revival, but he merged it with armed resistance. He gave a deeply disenfranchised population a sense of pride, a reclaimed identity, and most importantly, an external enemy to blame for their systemic poverty.
But, it's hard to reconcile this economic theory with the sheer amount of religious rhetoric we saw from the militants during that era. I mean, to the outside world, this looked exactly like a holy war for a sovereign Sikh state.
I know, you would totally assume theology was the primary driver based on the speeches. But the documentary cites a revealing 1999 survey on militant motivations.
Oh, from that study, Terrorism in Punjab, Understanding Grassroots Reality, right?
Yes. And it completely dismantles the assumption of an ideological holy war. By 1990, only 2% of the militants surveyed were actually committed to Bhindranwale's religious ideals.
Wait, only 2%?
Just 2%. And only 5% joined specifically to fight for an independent state of Khalistan.
So the overwhelming majority had no ideological commitment to a separatist state.
According to the empirical data, no. Look at the demographics of the militants. Over 80% came from marginalized Jat farming families. 64% came from poor and underprivileged backgrounds.
Wow.
A quarter of them were entirely unemployed, and nearly 40% stated they joined the insurgency simply for the thrill of battle.
What's fascinating here is how clearly that illustrates a direct pipeline
Yeah.
from the economic devastation of the Green Revolution to radicalized militancy.
Yeah.
These were rural kids with no farms, no factories, and no future, basically picking up weapons because the insurgency was the only source of agency and power available to them.
Right. The militancy really struggled to operate as a true ideological liberation movement. It was fed almost entirely by economic ruin.
But the Indian government didn't treat it as an economic crisis, did they? They didn't send debt relief or renegotiate water rights. They responded with political maneuvering and military force.
which acted as a massive accelerant.
Yeah, the documentary outlines the political Machiavellianism that sparked the real violence. And this is a crazy twist. Pindranwal didn't just emerge organically. He was initially funded and propped up by the ruling Congress Party.
Indira Gandhi's own party.
Yes, why would they do that?
Well, in the late 1970s, the moderate Sikh political party in Punjab, the Akal Takht, was gaining traction. They had drafted the Anandpur Sahib resolution.
Right, which demanded more autonomy for the state.
Exactly, specifically regarding river water and economic decentralization. But the central government viewed this moderate demand for economic autonomy as a massive political threat.
So, to destabilize the Akali Dal and fracture their voting base, the Congress Party provided financial and political backing to Bhindranwal.
Who was seen as an extreme fringe preacher at the time.
The logic was to let the extremist terrify the moderate voters, outflank the Akali Dal, and then allow the central government to swoop in as the heroes.
It is a textbook political wedge strategy, and it backfired disastrously.
Yeah, the government created a dynamic they entirely lost control of. Bhindranwal's followers quickly escalated from just rhetoric to assassinating political critics, journalists, and police officers.
And this spirals directly into the catastrophic climax of June 1984, which was Operation Blue Star.
Right. Bhindranwal and a heavily armed contingent of militants had fortified themselves inside the Golden Temple complex in Amritsar.
Sikhism's holiest site.
Yeah, and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi ordered the military to assault the complex, but the military tactically chose to launch the attack on a major Sikh religious holiday.
So the complex was packed with thousands of innocent pilgrims, men, women, and children. And the army deployed heavy artillery and tanks into the complex to break the militant fortifications.
And the civilian casualties were just staggering. The government officially claimed around 500 dead, but independent estimates range from 1,500 to up to 5,000 civilians killed in the crossfire.
It's horrifying. And historically, Sikhs were fiercely patriotic. They were heavily represented in the Indian Armed Forces.
So seeing their holiest site assaulted by their own military's tanks, littered with civilian bodies, it caused an unhealed generational trauma.
Operation Blue Star functioned as the ultimate radicalization engine. I mean, the movement for Khalistan barely existed as a mainstream demand before 1984.
Right, but the state violence validated every claim Bhindranwal had made about New Delhi.
Exactly. The cycle of violence spun totally out of control. Months later, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her 2 Sikh bodyguards.
And the immediate aftermath in New Delhi was horrific. Ruling party politicians and local police allegedly collaborated, using voter registration rolls to systematically identify and target Sikh households in an organized pogrom.
Mobs roamed the capital for days. Up to 10,000 Sikhs were murdered across the country. People were burned alive, and women were assaulted.
And the documentary explicitly notes that accountability for this organized mass violence was virtually non-existent.
It was. You combine the ongoing agrarian collapse with the destruction of the Golden Temple and top it off with an unpunished genocide in the capital. It pushed the population entirely over the edge.
And the government's response to the ensuing insurgency was to just suspend fundamental rights in Punjab and institute a system of encounter killings.
Yeah, encounter killings were essentially staged executions. The police would apprehend suspects, execute them without trial, and claim they were killed in a spontaneous shootout.
It's so dark. The state actually offered cash bounties and promotions to police officers based on the number of militants they killed.
Which predictably led to the rampant execution of innocent civilians just to meet quotas.
The documentary highlights the chilling case of a 12-year-old boy named Sukhdev. He was arrested, tortured, and murdered by the police. His body was secretly cremated so his family couldn't even claim his remains.
When a state acts with that level of unchecked brutality, theology ceases to matter.
Right. Even prominent militant leaders from that era, like Wasan Singh Zafarwal, stated on the record that they joined the armed insurgency solely because of police harassment and torture.
Not because of Bhindranwal's religious teachings. State violence became the primary recruiting mechanism.
So by around 1995, the insurgency was essentially crushed.
Right.
The Indian state deployed overwhelming military force.
Yeah, and the militant groups fractured. They frequently alienated the rural public by turning into criminal syndicates, extorting the very farmers that they claimed to protect.
So the armed conflict ended. But the underlying mechanisms that diverted water, the predatory agricultural debt, the lack of industrial infrastructure, those were never resolved.
Yeah.
You'd think the state would have learned from a decade of insurgency. But fast forward to 2020, and the exact same economic triggers were pulled again.
Yeah, the Indian government introduced new agricultural deregulation laws. These threatened to dismantle the minimum support price system, which farmers really rely on to guarantee a basic income.
And tens of thousands of farmers, predominantly from Punjab, marched on Delhi in a massive year-long protest.
But rather than debating the economic merits of those agricultural laws, right-wing politicians and social media networks immediately tried to delegitimize the protesting farmers.
By branding them as Khalistanis and terrorists,
Yeah.
they used the label as a political shield to avoid discussing the actual money.
And the failure to address that underlying economic reality directly paved the way for the rise of a new figure in 2022 and 2023.
Amritpal Singh.
Right.
Amritpal Singh is deliberately modeling himself as Bhindranwale 2.0. He matches the dress, the rhetoric, and the calls for an independent Khalistan.
But pay attention to the specific wounds he is targeting to build his following. He isn't just preaching theology.
He is targeting the modern fallout of the Green Revolution. The documentary notes that unemployment in Punjab still hovers around 8%.
And decades of intense, unregulated agrochemical use have poisoned the water table.
It's so sad.
The Malwa region of Punjab is now tragically referred to as the Cancer Belt. It's grappling with horrific rates of cancer, renal failure, and severe birth defects caused by heavy metals and pesticide runoff in the groundwater.
And adding to the misery, a 2017 study found that 20% of young Punjabis are addicted to heroin.
20%.
So the youth are facing a toxic environment, massive unemployment, and an addiction epidemic.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Amritpal Singh is utilizing the exact same strategy Bhindranwale pioneered.
Right.
One of his primary initiatives was opening drug rehabilitation centers. He recruits desperate followers through an anti-drug campaign and promises that an independent Khalistan is the only permanent solution.
He tells them a sovereign state will stop New Delhi from siphoning away Punjab's wealth, allowing them to finally heal their toxic land.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean?
It demands that we look critically past the superficial labels. A conflict presented on the global stage as a religious or separatist crisis is almost always masking a desperately unresolved economic and ecological disaster.
Beneath the ideological shouting, the Khalistan movement is fundamentally rooted in diverted river water, predatory loans, cancer clusters, and the deliberate suppression of industrial jobs.
And breaking that cycle requires genuine accountability. The documentary features an expert, former intelligence officer GBS Sidhu, who suggests a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Modeled after post-apartheid South Africa, right?
Yes, a mechanism to finally give the Sikh community answers.
Answers about the young men who were disappeared in encounter killings, judicial accountability for the orchestrators of the Delhi pogroms, and an honest accounting of Operation Blue Star.
Because without closure on the state violence, and without dismantling the economic traps set by the Green Revolution, the embers of Khalistan aren't extinguished.
They are just smoldering under the surface.
You simply cannot cure a systemic structural illness by merely bandaging the visible political wounds.
Well said. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you go about your day.
Yeah.
If the Khalistan movement, a conflict that claimed tens of thousands of lives, fractured a nation, and assassinated a prime minister, was fundamentally supercharged by the unexpected economic fallout of a celebrated agricultural miracle like the Green Revolution. I mean, how many other global conflicts dominating our headlines today are we entirely misdiagnosing?
That's the real question.
Are we focusing all our attention on the religious and ideological megaphones, while remaining completely blind to the quiet, crushing economic realities of the people holding them? Something to think about. Until next time.